Hello, this is Peace Weapon, and this is a Russwin Emhart. This is very special and unique lock. The key is very recognizable. It has angled cuts and these grooves on the bottom. I'll show you why they exist at the end after the gutting. The Russwin Emhart uses stacks of interlocked driver pins and key pins. The pin stacks have to be lifted and rotated to allow them to separate and the plug to rotate. So to pick it, I have to lift it and rotate the pin to the correct position. Unlike the Medico, there's no sidebar, but the plug has grooves that allow the top part, or rather the bottom of the driver pin, to ride along the plug and still lock into the key pin again. Usually, to prove that I'm picking it correctly, I should show the assembly of the pin stacks before picking. But this lock took a very long time to pick on video and many attempts. So I decided to pick it already assembled, and to prove that it is correctly assembled, I will use the key a few times. This will make all the pins interlock again. This will work in any unmastered Emhart, and it will be enough for those mastered Emharts for which the key corresponds to the first shear line to be lifted, which is the case. So at the beginning of the pick, you will see I will use a key a few times, removing it and putting it in again to make sure all the pin stacks are interlocked. However, this is a mastered Emhart and it will put some difficulty into it. Unlike most other locks, mastered Emharts can be much harder to pick, because the feedback needed to know if the pin stack is correctly rotated will be the same as the feedback you'll get from the bottom interlocked key pins on a mastered Emhart. So you will not know if the pin stack is correctly rotated, or at least it will be much harder. During the pick, I will use a few tricks that will help me pick the lock correctly. So let's get to picking. As I just said, I'm using the key to make sure all the stacks are interlocked. This is not a foolproof method, but is pretty effective. I have done it a few times and checked after I did it that in fact all the pin stacks were interlocked again. Now I'm zipping a bit, raking to make sure the pins are randomly rotated, and I'll start my pick using a tension wrench on the top of the keyway, and I'm using some 15 thousandths or 0.4 millimeters picks to go around that wording. As I mentioned before, this lock is mastered. It happens that the first binder, that is number 4, we'll have two shear lines. As I lift to the first shear line, I won't be able to test for the correct rotation using a clicky test, because the lower interlocked pins will still click even if it's not in the correct rotation. So what I'm doing with this stack is lifting to the second shear line, rotating correctly, and then dropping to the first shear line, as the binding order is easier to establish. So just now I dropped the stack to the first shear line and it is correctly rotated. The fifth pin is binding. This one is also mastered, but I cannot use the same trick on this one, or number 4 might drop. I can hear some clicking after rotation, so I know it might be set, but during the whole pick I am not completely sure I have successfully rotated the fifth sack. Another lock picker that made a video on Emhart explaining how to pick it is Geo. I will put a link in the description so you can watch it and learn the same way I did how to pick this lock. Here I am in the process of rotating the fifth stack. You can hear some clicking, but it's difficult to establish if that's clicking, that means correct rotation. Now I move to the second pin that I know it's binding. Listen how the sound changes. Much more clicky now. Trying to set pin 1, it's a higher lift. Now trying to rotate it. As I'm having some trouble rotating behind the tensioner, I will change to a bottom of the keyway tensioner so I can rotate the pin properly. It seems clicky, so I'll change again. Picking pin 3. Also a pretty high lift and a bit hard to rotate, but at the moment it doesn't seem to need any rotation. So I move to the back to pin 6 and try to set it and rotate it. Trying to rotate pin 6 is a bit hard because it's behind the low lift, and the tool that I'm using, that is a SS Dev, is a bit wider at the bottom of the shaft, and as I push it further down it rubs on the wording and makes it a bit more difficult. It seems it's set correctly, but I don't get an open. I will spend the next few minutes trying to find which is the pin that isn't correctly set or rotated, and I will discover that pin 3 doesn't bind for lift at the same time that binds for rotation. Instead, only after I set and rotate pin 6 will pin 3 bind for rotation, and that's the last pin I will have to move and rotate to get them open. By this time I have decided the problem pin is number 3, and I'm trying to rotate it, which is not easy as it's a high lift, but I'm trying to release tension and rotate it. And it's open. Here we see the plug. It has these grooves all around it. These grooves are where the bottom of the driver pins will rest when the plug turns. This area is different here. Seems like it's a mastering feature. Let's take a look at the pins. So this stack is not mastered. It has one key pin and one driver pin, and they interlock like this. So when you set them in the correct rotation, the space between them, while interlocked, will cause the clicky sound. It's this movement here that will cause the sound. This will not happen if it's not correctly rotated, because the key pin will be under tension. As for the mastered stacks, this one comes with two shear lines, and as you lift to the first shear line, the second shear line will still click due to existing a bit of space between the middle pin and the key pin. And although you can lift to the second shear line to prevent this problem, it will still make it harder than an unmastered Emhart. Now you can see how the driver pin rests on those grooves. Those grooves allow it to travel as the plug rotates. And as it comes back to the center, it will interlock with the key pin. I'm showing you the pins up close. Once again, we'll take a look at this key. You can see the angled cuts on the key. And these grooves on the bottom that we saw before, they will correspond to the same grooves of the plug, so that the driver pin can go all around even with the key inside. So this is it. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.